certainly a legend and an icon within our industry and our company. And he was gracious enough to lend us some of his time this morning. Mr. Bob Kilinski, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine, Andy. Thank you for the honor. Really do.
Well, we've been doing these interviews, more or less inspirational interviews with leaders within and without our company. And, the focus of these is to tell people stories and to understand their stories of overcoming adversity and inspiration. I think we're all kind of on information overload, drowning in information and perhaps starving for wisdom was the way that I've been putting it lately. And I think it's just, unfortunately, if we'd ever had this tragedy happen with COVID, I don't know that a lot of these stories would ever be told. So it's given us an opportunity, I think, to reflect and learn. And now we're moving into even a more extreme action phase of how do we survive and thrive in this new kind of normal. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, Bob, tell us about you, where you grew up, and how did you find real estate?
Well, before I answer your question, Andy, I want to, anybody listening to this or viewing this, I'm wishing that none of your family, your friends, or anybody you know are affected by this virus that we are now fighting as a country. So, and if you do know someone who has had it or been involved in it, that they have gotten on the other side of it, recovered it, and hopefully have no lasting effects. So every day at the Southeast region, we do a report of anybody we know, and that covers almost 14,000 people, staff, agents, OPs. Do we know of anybody in our organization? So we have a system built for reporting to Cheryl at the regional office. A, we want to know. B, we start a prayer list. C, we want to know if the family needs any kind of help, because some people are not equipped financially, especially in these times, to get the things they need. So in true Keller Williams form, the culture comes through in the most difficult times. So I want you all to know that, because I take pride in a region that really cares about its people. So that's the front end.
Yeah.
So if you know of anybody in the Market Center, family especially, just tell your leadership. Leadership knows how to communicate with a region. That being said, Andy, you say you want to tell about me. Well, this is not always comfortable for me because I know my story, but I'm usually interested in other people's stories more than my own because I know my own story. But since you asked me directly, I will try and answer your questions and follow your guidelines. Ask your question again, because I want to answer it as you ask it.
Yeah. So tell us about you, where you grew up, and how you found real estate.
Okay. I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, to a Polish immigrant father and a Tennessee farm girl who met in New Orleans, fell in love, and 4 years later had me. My dad was a violin teacher for 61 years before he retired. My mom was a professional clerk at a company that would hire her. And she moved from insurance companies to distribution companies to logistics companies, but basically was always the clerk because she only had a high school education. But what I will say is I grew up in an apartment, but I grew up in an environment of love and encouragement. And for that, I'll always be thankful, because you can't see them. They're the intangibles, but they are the drivers, the comforters, the motivators in a family, in a relationship, that make things able to happen. So went to public school in New Orleans, just what they call the uptown area, if anybody knows New Orleans. And I was able to excel. And I figured out I could excel in grades because I was skinny. I was not talented in sports. God gave me the gift of gab, gave me the gift of logic, and gave me the gift of, you got to get out of here. If you don't try something, you won't get out of here. So for 12 years in the public school, you know, I was involved in political leadership when it came to junior high and high school. I graduated number 5th in my class out of 584. Was the president of senior class and went on with a scholarship to Tulane University, which was 4 blocks from my high school, closer to my house. And the kid that rode the bike, you know, to class. My counselor in high school, because I was good at math and science and would help tutor other people, said I should be an engineer. So not knowing any different, I enrolled in because I got a scholarship in electrical engineering and hit a wall. I was the not brilliant kid, but I was a smart kid in high school. I got to college at Tulane and found out that kids from all over the United States who were way smarter than me were sitting right next to me, in front of me, and back of me. And so, never having had to do study skills in high school and below, I was incapacitated or incapable of having study skills. Here I am, a freshman at Tulane, thinking it's going to be the continuation of the way the career was. First real stumbling block in terms of education or business was freshman year at Tulane. I mean, I was slammed. I was way over my head. And that was a most uncomfortable feeling because I hadn't been there in my life. I realized that, you know, we were in an apartment, had no car. My friends lived in nice houses, had cars, but somehow that was not a disadvantage. It was a disappointment or maybe an embarrassment, but it wasn't a disadvantage. When I got to Tulane, I was disadvantaged. And I had to figure out, what am I going to do now? Because if I can't go through this program, I won't go to college. My parents couldn't afford to send me to college. I couldn't afford to go to a town on a scholarship. I had a full scholarship to Rice in Houston and Georgia Tech here in Atlanta. Couldn't take it because I couldn't afford to live, buy books, you know, buy food.
Wow.
So I lived at home to cover those expenses, rode a bike literally to school. I elevated to a moped in my sophomore year. That was a biggie. So fast forward a little bit, graduated Tulane, got out, you know, it took a lot of effort, learned a lot about the fact that E to P, I didn't know they called it then, but it was E to P that I learned in college. So when Gary explained it, I said, oh, I know exactly when that happened to me, because I was totally self-contained, entrepreneurial, if you will. Going into college, I came out with a big P, saying systems, understand, you know, put it together and get to a higher level. But I also knew I didn't want to be an engineer. So in my junior year, I had applied for a scholarship of a local company that gave out MBA scholarships. So I graduated with at least one honor, called a certificate. And got out. I was in the military, ROTC. So I was now, by I guess balance of duty, I owed 2 years to my country to be an officer in the Army for 2 years following my graduation. But as you all know, deferment happens when you go to school, and they can give you another deferment for a year if you find a really good job. And all that happened to me. So God was watching over me pretty good, making sure I wasn't going into things I didn't know or couldn't handle before it was time to handle. Went to Tulane MBA for 2 more years, stayed at home another 2 years, total of 6 years in college at home, and worked during the summer. And in MBA, I graduated with more than one certificate in business and finance, business management finance. Went to work for IBM in New Orleans, and I worked 1 year as what they call a systems engineer. I actually worked between the sales force and the technical force with the customer. And that was another sort of learning curve. Getting involved with the real customer base and solving the real world problems, because I've been 6 years, well, 6 plus 12, 18 years in academia. And you get out in the real world with a job, and now you have to do real things. And you have to be, you're managed by real people. It's not teachers anymore, it's sales managers, general managers, customers, their managers. Excuse me. So I worked 1 year with IBM at that time, and then my deferments ran out and I had to report for duty. So in June of 1967, any of you all, I know most of you probably weren't born then, but in June of 67, the Vietnam War was at its height. And I was going into officer training as a second lieutenant. By the time I finished officer training, because of the death rate of lieutenants in the Army in Vietnam, I went from second lieutenant to first lieutenant in 3 months.
Wow.
I didn't do a damn thing to earn it. It was just because they needed people coming up the line. So I became a lieutenant. One of the interesting stories, I've been writing the Secretary of the Army. I was writing the Secretary of Defense. I was writing my senators. I was writing my congressmen. I was writing anybody I could to say, please don't send me to Vietnam. I'm going to be lousy there and get killed. Why don't you use my skills for something else that might benefit the Army in its effort to win this war? So I went to Fort Eustis in Virginia for officer training camp. And the point here is 3 days before I was to be deployed to San Francisco. And you know what that means. You're going to San Francisco to go overseas. I get a call and the sergeant says, Lieutenant Kilinski, Colonel was on the phone from Washington, wants to talk to you on the phone. I said, I don't know what I've done, but it doesn't sound good. So I go meet phone. Yes, sir. Kilinski, your orders have been redone. Report to the Pentagon next Monday. This was a Wednesday. We graduated on a Friday. So on the following Monday, I am going to report to the Pentagon for my assignment.
Wow.
I'm in Fort Useless, we call it, Virginia. Drove to Washington, D.C. I forget, we'd prearranged with some guys to have an apartment in Maryland somewhere. So it took me an hour and a half in Maryland traffic, D.C. traffic to get to the Pentagon. And I got there 45 minutes early, scared to death in my pressed uniform. There's this giant building with 5 sides. I have no idea where to go. You park a mile away, I have to walk to the building. So I'm walking up the steps, and I'll never forget this. The first guy I saw in uniform, I saluted. And the guy standing by the door, he said, Lieutenant, I'm a security guard. You don't have to salute me. So that was my introduction to the Pentagon. I go in, I find I'm working for a 1-star general. And to speed it up to the question you actually asked, they didn't know what to do with me. There were 32 lieutenants from all over the country. They had brought into a special program to computerize the Pentagon and all the services that go along with what they have to do. Again, 1967, former IBMer, engineer, MBA, and we're working with the computers that fill the whole room, the disks that are bigger than this computer you're on, tapes that are spinning everywhere in rooms, raised floor, meet locker temperature. And so I was in charge of my area because the colonels and generals had no clue what to do with me. So 2 years go by like that, and I get discharged. By this time, I'm married to my college sweetheart. We're living for 1 year together in DC. We graduate, and here's a fun thing. I told IBM where I was going back to. I wasn't coming back until August because I got out in June. For 9 weeks, she and I took a little car that we bought and went around Europe and met the people in the little towns of Europe for 9 weeks. One of the best experiences of my life in terms of travel. Got back to New Orleans, went to work for IBM, found out IBM was not the same company I left. Left IBM, went to a small consulting company in New Orleans. It went out of business. 2 guys and I formed our own little consulting company. It went out of business. So I'm 30 years old, married with a wife that's no longer working. She was a teacher. I have a son that's about a year old and out of work, completely unemployed. 30 years old. Now, wait a minute, let's go back through this. I got an MBA. I went to IBM. I was in the Pentagon. I should be president of something by now. But no, I'm living in an apartment in a suburb of New Orleans with a wife who's taking care of a child we need to take care of, and no income. So you say, what does one do? Struggle number 1 out of 3 major struggles I'm going to tell you about. So one says you got to get income, Bob. So I started doing what we call networking. I told everybody in the world that I was looking for employment. I had to drop the pride factor. Believe you me, ego and pride get in the way of a lot of things. I just had to grovel, if you would say. But I made a decision, Andy, which goes to your question you asked. I was not going to go back in the computing world because A, I wasn't that good at it. B, I saw where it was headed. It was corporate America and I wasn't going to fit in very well. So I had made a decision. I was going to go to work for an industry that I could use during the day for the client. But what I learned in the industry, I could do for myself nights and weekends, so to speak. It boiled down to two industries, this being a stockbroker or a realtor. Now, those are the furthest things you can be from where I came from. So I did. I landed a small real estate job as the business sales manager of a company that was emerging that became the used car dealership for a builder who was building major subdivisions, prominent builder in New Orleans. And a guy and I, his sort of son-in-law, adopted son-in-law, started Chuck Staub and Associates in 1972. And from 1972 to 1979, we built the company to 4 offices, 400 agents, selling predominantly investment properties in one division, and we would take in all the houses that people wanted to sell so they could buy into the new subdivision. We had to work for it. It wasn't given to us. And then, of course, we did general brokerage. In 1979, watching the climate that was happening in the United States with mortgage rates zooming up to 18% on fixed mortgages, I bet you no one listening today, if you did, I applaud you, went through that debacle. You know, we had a lot of debacles in the housing industry. Try a builder going to the sale and he has to pay 23 points on the loan so the buyer can get a 16% fixed mortgage.
Gosh.
30-year fixed. Well, it slowed things down. But Tom, my partner, and I saw what was writing on the wall. We sold our company to Coldwell Banker in 1979, and I did the smartest thing I could have done from that point. I don't cook, I make reservations, but I bought a restaurant franchise. So Tom and I bought a restaurant franchise called Duff's Famous Smorgasbord. It was an all-you-can-eat cafeteria, and we built 550 seats in an area we thought was going to kill it. Our logic was the economy is crashing, people have to eat. We had a low-cost meal and all you could eat. What better formula than that? The one thing we forgot, people have to eat, but they don't have to eat with you. Mm. And after 4 months of tremendous cash flow and a lot of debt, and by this time, I forgot to tell you, we started a building company, took our building crew, built it out ourselves. We're up to here in debt. I mean, in debt, but we've been successful. We had accumulated 120 properties as rental properties, and we had a portfolio. We could go to the bank and borrow money. We had a good banker. Unfortunately, we got overserved. He gave us too much money without too much checking, and we opened a restaurant and put all eggs in one basket. Debacle number 2. 5 months after opening the restaurant, it was negative cash flow. First 5 months, I thought I was going to retire at 38. The next 6 months on for the next 3 years, we sold every property to stay alive. We mortgaged our houses, almost mortgaged the kids. I had 3 kids by then. By the way, those of you who know Anna Kilinski, my daughter, she was just born at this time. She was 1 year old when we opened the restaurant. And we thought we were going to had it made because the other people that we saw were making money hand over fist. Well, that doesn't always happen. And we lost basically somewhere in the neighborhood of $3 to $4 million. And we're in debt for 2. So in 1983, you ever seen the movies where the guy walks in the bank, puts the keys on the banker's desk and says, "I'm done"? Well, we tried that. And the banker just gave the keys back to us. He says, "No, you're not done. You may be done, but you're not done by handing me the keys." Fortunately, we had an SBA loan and we were able to do some workouts. Took me 8 years to break even. 8 years to get to the point where all the loans were paid off. Still had second mortgages on my house, still had third mortgages on my office building. But you know what? I'd gotten back into the real estate business. When I recognized the restaurant was not going to work, I'd gotten a call just out of the blue from the leading realtor in town wanting me to come and be a sales manager for one of their offices. So those of you who know New Orleans, it's Gertrude Gardner Realtors. That was the Harry Norman of New Orleans. I said yes. I had 3 kids in private school. We had a mortgage payment, all the suburban things you can imagine. So could have gone bankrupt. A lot of friends said, why don't you go bankrupt? And there was something in me that bankrupt wasn't an option. It was not smart. It was business, not business smart, but it was something that my dad taught me, that loving father that played violin for 61 years. He says, son, if you give your word, you keep your word. Okay, Dad. So for 8 years, Tom and I, my partner, kept our word. We did what we had to do. We paid what we had to pay. We negotiated out of what we could negotiate out of. And in the end, probably in the late 80s, what we call the break-even date, we actually popped a bottle of champagne and said, okay, we don't owe the government any more money or the banks any more money except on mortgages, not on interest-only loans or unsecured loans. Nobody's going to foreclose. Tom had got reemployed. I was now embedded heavily in the Gardner organization. In fact, I was now the general manager and running the 18 offices that we had. And that was the next 10 years of my life. While my kids grew up and went to high school and then off to college, I was a senior vice president for a major real estate company, brokerage company in New Orleans. So first company I had ownership in, second company I did not. First company was smaller, second company was larger. So I went from big fish, small pond to a medium-sized fish in a very large pond. But it prepared me for a lot of things that I didn't realize. I bought and sold companies, merged them in with Gertrude Gardner, closed offices, hired and fired people, had to solve legal problems, got to be the person that handled all the E&O for the entire company. All the major complaints came to my desk. So I learned another business education. I had one in Tulane, one at IBM, one at the Army, one on the street, and now I'm employed at a high level, one of 3 people in the city, general managers of the 3 leading companies, and interfacing with a lot of people, learning a lot of things. Well, at that point in life, my last child, Anna, was getting ready to go to college. Belle, their mother, was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and my broker fired me. So thinking, okay, I'm childless, empty nester. I'm going to be a widower if this doesn't turn out well, and with no job. And it turned out to be, that's when I was about 55 years old. So the good news is, out of all this, is that before Belle died, and just after Anna went to college, my last child, I had been reemployed by the same broker, but at a lower level. The agents, thank God for the agents, supported me and said to the broker, you fire him with his wife having cancer, we all leave. He had no choice. But I knew I had a career cul-de-sac. I was done. The minute my wife died, last child went to college, I was going to get fired again. I had no career path here at all. So out of the blue, I got a call from who I thought was a RE/MAX agent in New Orleans. And I'm sitting in my big desk in my big office, still, with the suit and tie from IBM, but in the real estate business. And she says, hi, Bob, this is Lynn. I said, no. She says, oh, you're with RE/MAX. She says, no, we used to be with RE/MAX. We left RE/MAX and 10 of us bought the Gulf States region of Keller Williams, and we opened our first office in Mandeville. And there's a guy here named Mark Willis who comes in to visit us every other week. He's going to pass right by your office to go back to the airport. He would like to talk to you. Pause. My loving dad. he said every time, he says, I want you to understand, son, never say no to what you don't know about. And I've coined the phrase, never say no until you know what you're saying no to. Always have a discussion, because a discussion is not a decision, it's a discussion. And a lot of people think when you talk about something, that's a decision. No, it's a discussion. So I wasn't about to say no, because I was already in a situation that was so untenable, but I had no idea who this guy was. And I'd heard the name Keller Williams like a railroad train 2 states away. And so I said, okay, but of course not going to meet in my office. So I tell him, I said, I only have a half an hour. I'm a very busy, very wanted, very needed guy, and very busy, and I'm very important, and tell him I only have a half hour. So I meet him at a Shoney's, a half a block or a block away from the office. And I meet Mark Willis, who is today a very dear friend. And Mark, with his Texas accent, I told him, I said, I'm only got a half hour, Mark. I'm a very busy guy, I'm very important. I'd be missed. I'm over there. I'm doing big things. What you got? Well, for 2.5 hours, he explained to me all about Keller Williams and how it worked. I could go down all the list, but you know what I'm talking about, the way the company operated. And after 2.5 hours, he passed me away. He says, hey, man, I love talking to you, but I got to catch a plane. I was mesmerized with the way, because that's the way I would like to see a real estate company run. I'd like to see the agents involved in making decisions in the office. We had a president's council that met once a year at a nice country club. They'd give us all the ideas, we'd write them all down, and then go back and do everything we were going to do anyway. And it was lip service, and I knew it. Nobody saw the books. There was no real high-level education, especially the business form of education. It was list and sell education, contract stuff, vendors coming into sales meetings. It was typical. It was traditional. It was what I grew up in, what I knew. But I knew somewhere down inside of me, from a business point of view, from going through the things I went through, that there was a better way. In fact, I said, I knew I had a career cul-de-sac, so I started designing my own sign, from Realty 100, a Remax lookalike. And the phone number was 455-0100. I had all the marketing materials waiting. And then when Mark sat down, of course, no one knew this except my wife and my kids. When Mark sat down, man, I went home and basically put those in a box and said, this will never work. What he's got works. So I had to wait to get my bonus, because I knew how my broker worked. And I told Mark, I'm very interested. I'd like to know more. And that was in about November of 97. Bell died December 8th, 1997. December 23rd, 2 days before that Christmas, I flew to Austin, Texas to meet Gary, and to see whether or not I would be qualified to own a region, because I decided that owning a market center was nice, but I already done all that. I was looking for an opportunity, and I made the statement to myself, you're 55, Bob, you have no equity. It got bled out by all the debacles that you went through, the medical bills that you had with your wife, the college tuitions and the loans that you had to do for your kids. You've got nothing, and you can end up like your dad on Social Security unless you do something that would be yours and you rebuild your equity. I'm a big believer in building equity. Learn that real hard. Energy is not, in fact, I tell people, when you look at the eye chart, the big E at the top of the eye chart, I said, besides seeing 2020 or 2030, because your doctor's asking you, what else do you see in that E? Have you ever given yourself a personal eye test, not an eyeball eye test? And the personal eye test is, what does that E mean to me? And I've decided that it means equity to me. And equity in all forms, not just money. Equity with people, equity with relationships, equity with health, but it's equity. And I said, to survive and be a person that can do well and help others, you've got to build towards equity. So when after I left Mark, he told me these things are available. It's a young company, but it's going to grow. And I just had a feeling in my heart, soul, He was right. It was going to grow. It was going to be like on the wave. Back up a little bit. I'd been offered a Century 21 franchise by Dave Jenks when he was with uh, Century 21. I've been offered 2 Remax franchises in New Orleans. All 3 I turned down. I didn't see the business model really working well. And I didn't know how to evaluate business at that time. So I said no. But when this came along, it was in my chosen field, the field I really love, the people I really love, but it had a model and system and a culture that just absolutely drew me like a fly to honey. And I couldn't get it out of my system. It just stayed. I actually went to my broker and said, I ran across some kind of good ideas I'd like to run by you, sort of trying to save my own career a little bit. And when I talked about agents having decisions, he just said, that'll never happen. I said, well, they also split the profits. He says, are you crazy? I said, just tell me what they do, Glenn. I said, they have education, much higher level than we offer. Well, we don't need to educate our agents. We don't want them to be that smart. Quote, we don't want them to be that smart. I said, oh, I see. Let's keep them in the dark ages. Okay. And I went on and on. He said, so he shut me down. I said, okay, I've done my fiduciary thing. Now I got to do my Bob thing. So I flew to Austin to meet Gary on December 23rd. One of the best meetings of my life. And not because anything great happened there. We actually left his office, went across the street to a bagel shop, and sat there for 2 hours and talked about kids and family and relationships and how you build lives and what's really important to people. And said, wow, when do we talk about real estate? Oh, we'll go back to the office and we'll bring out the book. And so I spent 2 hours with him over bagels, which I hate, and talking about family and stuff, which I love. Then we went back to his office. He says, well, okay. He says, you got it. Met Mo Anderson. She was working down the hall. Great lady, but didn't know much about her at all. Mark was the guy I knew. So he was sort of my concierge escort through this whole thing. And then guess who I ran to in the corner of the building? Dave Jenks. He's the director of education. And he's the guy who was trying to sell me a 21 franchise 8 years ago. I said, Dave, what are you doing here? He says, I'm working for the best company on the planet. I said, okay, that rang a bell. So I sat in Gary's office, and this is a fun story for me. Hope it's fun for you because it's where the Southeast region started. On that cold day in Austin, Texas, on Bee Cave Road, the old office of Keller Williams International. And when they say Keller Williams International, it had, maybe 8,000 square feet, if that. I'm thinking, this guy's thinking big, international in the door, I like it. I'm on the 3rd floor in a reconditioned office and, lean and mean, right, Andy?
Mm-hmm.
So Gary and I sit down, he says, you took the test. It looks like you did okay on the test. We had the IRA or something like that back in the day. We've changed our methodology many times, improvement. But I, quote, passed the test. And so he says, all right. He says, but the girls that first talked to you want you to be their regional director. I said, I'm done working for someone. What else you got? He says, well, the region where you live and where you know everybody is sold. I can't resell it. He says, however, next door, we're forming a Southeast region, Alabama, Georgia, part of Tennessee, but I don't know which part, west or east. I'm negotiating with another guy about a region up in that area. I said, okay. I said, how do I determine what it's going to be so I can evaluate it? He says, I'll call you in about a week and let you know. He says, but before you leave, I want you to write me a check for whatever is going to be the Southeast region if you want it. And I had prepared, myself to be able to negotiate. You always bring a checkbook if you're going to negotiate. But I knew it was negotiating for. So I went to the men's room, literally, and I sat there and I thought for a second. I said, okay, my kids went to Alabama. All 3 kids went to the University of Alabama. My mother's from Tennessee, and all the money in the world's in Atlanta. This sounds like it could work. So I went back to Gary and I said, okay, I'll take the Southeast region if you give it to me contiguous Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee. He said, well, I may have to carve out Memphis. And Mobile's already carved out in Alabama. I said, all right, you know, Memphis, I know. Mobile's a nice city, but no biggie deal. But I have to have Atlanta, Birmingham, and Nashville. He said, okay, we'll draw it up that way. So in the office, in this Bee Cave office, we literally were designing the outer boundaries of the slab of the Southeast region. And it does. It's 3/4 of Tennessee, 90%. It's everything in Alabama except below I-10, the Panhandle, which belongs to Gulf states, and all of Georgia. And I said, that's big enough territory. I'll figure out what to do with it. I have no idea. Don't know anybody at all. And when I tell you I made the decision based on my mother being from Tennessee, my kids joined Alabama, and all the money was in Atlanta, that's the decision that an intelligent 55-year-old MBA educated finance man made a decision to say yes to a guy he didn't know that ate bagels that I hated. So
that's like picking
but he was impressive, and it hit my heart. Yes, Andy.
That's like picking your brackets for March Madness based on the colors of the teams, I think.
Oh, well, that's how my second son chose college. He went to Alabama because his brother was there. And I said, well, Kenny, why don't you check it around? He says, Dad, all campuses have buildings, classes, dorms, bars, and parties. It doesn't matter. I said, okay, I wouldn't have made a decision like that, but it's your career, and we'll go with that. It was that luck strike of fate, God in your life saying in ways that you don't hear, but you know you're supposed to do this. But it's exciting as hell and scary as hell all at the same time. So here I am, a 55-year-old resident of New Orleans, having a network and friends and whatever, but an empty nester, a widower, and out of work, essentially. So on March 3rd at 8 o'clock in the morning in 1998, my wife's been dead 4 months. I walked into the home of my owner broker and gave him a 5-page resignation letter. I said, I'm resigning at noon today. I'm going to the office. I'm at a whole sales meeting. I'm not going to violate anything at all. I'm not going to recruit. I'm not going to do anything. But I do believe I have the right and the obligation to close out in a form that I will feel comfortable with. So I went. Of course, he's standing in the doorway the whole time, making sure I'm not saying something out of line, and went through a whole sales meeting. In the sales meeting, told my people, I said, I want to let you know that this morning at 8 o'clock, I handed Glenn, I pointed to him at the door, my resignation letter. I'm going off in a different direction. I want to wish you all the best of luck, and always a great, so this is a good company to work for, and all the right things to say. But tears rolling down my face because the people I'm talking to are friends. They are people that help me through great times, bad times, people I've helped. And as anybody in the real estate knows, if you're sitting in the team leader or the broker seat, you are a marriage counselor, a psychiatrist, a child educator, a listener, yada, 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 yada. You really bond with the people that you work with, more so in this business than others. And it was tough, but I knew it was the right thing to do. So, make a long story short, what's the movie, the guy with the goldfish, Jerry Maguire? I was Jerry Maguire, and I didn't even have a goldfish. I said, I'm walking out, and oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you, Gary made me write 2 checks that day in Austin. One for the Southeast region, which was healthy. And he said, oh, by the way, you're writing me another check. I said, what's that? He says, you're writing me a check for a franchise that you're going to open in New Orleans, where you are. I said, well, Gary, I've already opened offices. I know how to open offices. I know how to build them. I know how to sell them off, change people. I got all that. I said, why would I do that? He says, because you haven't run one of my offices yet. And he looked at me across the table. I'll never forget this. He says, Bob, if you're going to buy the trucking company, I suggest you drive the truck first. And
great lesson.
And he made me write another check for the franchise fee. That time it was $18,000 for franchise. And Metairie Market Center, number 110, is alive today and making, on a good year, $1 million. On a tough year, maybe 500 to 7. From people who were involved in my life that I helped bring in, that helped me make it and become the eligible to go do the Southeast region. Lucille D'Angelo, the OP of the Metairie Market Center, was my secretary at Gertrude Gardner. She was my goldfish, G-O-L-D, goldfish. And she had faith. And we started the market center in the back room of my house where my kids used to play. It was a playhouse in the back room. So we put 2 desks, 2 computers, 2 phones, and boom, open a market center the wrong way. Spent a year doing things wrong. Gary is my coach, so I blame him partially. But I know what he was doing. He was letting me fall, bruise, break, and learn. So when I came to the Southeast region in 99, and I literally came over in my old Toyota in 7 manuals, Johnny Appleseed style, you all may appreciate this. Six Flags, there's a hill right at Six Flags that overlooks the downtown area of Atlanta. And I'm listening to a book on tape, and I want to finish the book on tape, and I see 285, and I knew that's where I had to turn, get off, and go to the hotel. So I pulled over to that very spot, not knowingly, to listen to the book. Well, I forgot about the book, and I'm looking at the downtown skyline of Atlanta, and I can tell you in a nanosecond the height of excitement and the depth of fear that I had, because I had no clue. I'm just rolling into town, total stranger, been in Atlanta once in the airport. And you know that how much Atlanta's at the airport. And I said, here's the opportunity of a lifetime, Bob, or it's going to be your biggest failure ever. But you know what? There's something in me that says, just go do it, and it'll work out somehow. Now, here's the part that I find really interesting, because how Kay and I met. So I'm coming to Atlanta back and forth from April of 99 to about July of 99, that period. And I'm staying at the Marriott Perimeter because my mother's next door neighbor's son was the manager and I could get a free room. And at this time of my life, free was big. Free meal, free room, free anything was good, because all my money was tied up, the little money I had, because I got stripped hard, guys and girls, back in the 80s with that restaurant. And I didn't stop paying for it, even at the point I'm telling you about. It had a cost in many ways on me, not just money. But what it did have was it built a sheet of armor around me, scar tissue, if you will, that turned into be a strength. It said, Bob, if you can get through that, you can do this. So just go do it. And I started with asking Harmon Homes, the Board of Realtors, MLS, you name it, lawyers, mortgage people. If you were going to do this, my question was, if you were going to do this in Atlanta, who would you want to partner with, or who do you know would know the person I want to partner with? And I asked that question of everybody I met, like prospecting. But I called it a leadership search, because Gary said, Bob, you know the systems, you don't know the market. You need to find somebody who knows the market and partner up with them somehow. So I asked that question. Well, Kay's name kept popping up. Well, you need to talk to Kay Evans, or Kay Evans will know that person. If you want to be in business, I'd be in business with Kay Evans, because everybody knows her. She knows everybody. She's been in the real estate business. She teaches it, da, 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 da. One morning, I'm sitting at breakfast with Murray Parks from Harry Norman. And Murray and I are talking because I knew her dad through a friend of mine, and he was in the real estate business, and she's in the real estate business. So I said, Murray, and she said, Kay Evans. I said, stop. I said, okay, I've heard Kay's name about 20 times. Do you really know her, or are you just using her name? She says, oh, no, I know her. I said, well, can you get me an appointment? At 8:20, she picks up the phone. She calls Kay. She gets Kay on the phone and says, I got a guy here. And I think what she did was, because she walked off, she says, I got a guy here I want you to check out. But we got an appointment with Kay. We went to the home bank building where she's the education director of education for home bank. And I sat in front of her for the first time and I told her what I was doing. She knew more about Keller Williams than I did. She had followed Keller Williams since she went to a convention with Jenny Pruitt, who she used to work for, and sat in a Gary Keller speech, a TED talk by Gary Keller. Came back and said the same thing to Jenny. That's what we're going to do. And Jenny shut her down and said, no, we can't do that. So when I walked in her office, I found out she had been recruited before. She was asked to be the regional director of the Southeast region before. They wanted to be open a market center, everything. I said, why did you turn it all down? She says, wasn't right time for me. She says, I said, is this the right time? Is it possible? She said, no, I'm doing what I want to do. I said, okay. She says, but I know a guy named Sean Rawls who's in my classes that you need to talk to, because if you're going to start the type of company I know Keller Williams is, you want this type of talent to be your ground zero. She set an appointment with Sean that afternoon, and we met at a, as he called it, and I did too, it's a uncleaned from the meeting in the morning conference room at the Fairfield Inn on Hammond Drive. And he and I went and talked for 3 hours. And on that conversation, we made plans to go to Austin to meet Gary to talk about opening the first market center in Atlanta. And
First Atlanta,
Sandy Springs happens to be off and on the #1 market center in the country.
we've heard of it.
You ever heard of it? Yeah, well, it's just down the road a ways. At any rate, we fly, we talk, and then on the plane back, he says, I want to do this, but I only want to do this if Kay's involved. I said, well, then, Sean, you have to help me, because she told me no. And I've been meeting with Kay. When I come back in town, I meet with Kay and I say, Kay, is the answer still no? She says, oh, I'm happy with what I'm doing. So the crux of all this comes, I take her to lunch one day in July, and into July, just to thank her for introducing me to Sean Rawls and helping me. She said, I help you find people, da, da, da. So I took her to lunch. And as we're finishing lunch and I'm walking to the car, because that's my mother teaching me the gentleman, opening the car door for her, I said, Kay, I want to ask you one question, just one last question before I go search for who I wanted you to be in my life. Are you doing today what you want to do for the rest of your life? Hmm. She says, I think I am. I said, okay, thank you. That gives me the release. It's over. Third time's a charm. Tried to date the girl. She says, no and hell no. I said, okay, done, next. So about a week or so later, I'm in Gulf Shores, Alabama with friends, just taking a break. And 9 o'clock on Saturday night, I get a call. It's Kay Evans. She says, Bob, that opportunity you talked about, is it still available to me? I said, well, hell yeah. What's up? She said, well, when are you going to be in Atlanta next? I said, I'll be there Monday to talk to you. So I went back home from my friends, packed, flew, came to Atlanta on Monday, and we met together for about a half a day at the first American Title office on Glen Ridge at 285, because I had friends in New Orleans who set me up a free office in Atlanta through their friends. And Kay and I talked about it, and I was going through the whole thing, and then offered her, I said, I would like you to be a partner with me. I would like to sell you 49% of the region that I own. And I said, what was the change of mind here? She says, well, I was in Tampa this last week teaching for Home Bank, kind of thinking, I really kind of tried traveling, although there was a lot of good looking guys I teach to. But when I came home, my husband, Glenn, had read the material you gave me that I never read. So we're all like that. Realtors don't read. So, and he said, when I got into the condo or where they're living, he said, honey, I've read this stuff and it has your name written all over it. Why are you telling this guy no? You should be in this. This is you. That's prompted the call to Gulf Shores to me, why I flew back in on Monday. Well, on that Monday in August, I guess, she said, okay, we're going to do this. And I mean, I'm blown away. Okay. And here's the interesting thing. I called Gary and I said, Gary, You told me to find somebody who knew the market. I said, I've done one better. I found somebody who the market knew. And she and I are going to make a partnership for all 3 states because she knows people in other states too. And he says, well, I really think you ought to get 3 people, one for Georgia, one for Tennessee, and one for Alabama. I said, I hear you and I respect what you're saying, but I think I'm going to do this. And if we do find somebody, it will be somebody we bring in together. So on October 1st, 1999, Kay and I signed the papers for her to become a 49% owner of the Southeast region, my retaining 51%. And basically, it was what I had into it divided by 2, or divided by 49.51. And off we went. And Sean was already sort of involved. And from that point is when we were really starting to open and launch, develop the systems to launch the Sandy Springs office, which we did in November, late November. We moved into the actual office because they had the core group that was working from home and some other little small offices. And then we finally consolidated because we got the office space done. And on January 25th, 2000, we had the grand opening of the first office of the Southeast region, Sandy Springs. Now, let me take a side trail. Just a personal interest of mine that I want to share with you. How things work for you if you expose yourself and are vulnerable, but still work hard. It's a combination of things you got to put together. So, Tony, I was married. Wife died in 97. Kept wearing my ring, but had not taken it off since the wedding. And I was hanging on to my city, my life, my former wife. But it was 1999, December 31st. You all know what that was. New millennium. Y2K, I think it is.
Yep.
So before I went out to a party with friends on New Year's Eve in New Orleans, I went into the closet where I had Belle's stuff, and I took off my ring and put my ring with hers. And sorry.
No, it's okay.
And I said to God, I said, you've given me challenges, beautiful kids, beautiful wife, opportunities, but it's time for me to move on. I said, I'm putting this here as a symbol. New millennium, new life. And that's the way I looked at it. So I started a leadership search again, this time for a partner. So I came back to Atlanta and I told Kay, I said, Kay, I'm looking for a tall, good-looking girl who can dance. I love to dance. I put the word out. I told everybody, all the core group, Jennifer Barnes of the core group said, here's what I'm looking for. Well, we had our party opening and I'm sitting in the conference room, the front conference room, the Sandy Springs office with the OP to B of the East Cobb office signing papers. And a girl walks by a glass door. Now the glass door is all about 3 feet wide. I knew she didn't work here. She wasn't part of the core group. Looked really kind of cute. So I got rid of the paperwork and the guy and I said, we'll finish this later. Walked around the office, saw her talking to people I know, Jennifer Barnes in the first core group. Walked around, saw Kay, and Kay grabs me. She says, I want you to meet somebody, Bob. I said, Kay, I'm on a mission. I'll get back to you. She said, no. You have to meet her now. She's leaving early to go to Columbus. She's one of the sponsors of the office party opening. I said, okay. Well, you can imagine it was the same girl, Linda Cook. So on January 25th at 4:24, but nobody's really counting, Linda and I met, talked, exchanged phone numbers, and she was off to Columbus because her dad lived in Columbus. Her mother had died the previous year. And I called her from New Orleans. We had our first date. Our second date was the Keller Williams Convention at Amelia Island in 2000.
I've heard about that.
Yeah. And she tells a story. She says, so Jennifer walked in the ladies' room, there's Linda. And Jennifer's comment, she says, it must have been one hell of a first date for you to come down to the convention, as your second date. Long story short, we're married. We live in East Cobb. Between us, we have 5 kids, 4 of them in Atlanta, 1 in Medellin, Colombia, 14 grandchildren, 12 here in Atlanta, 2 in Medellin. Incredible life because the Southeast region did what it did through people like you all and Andy, a leader, the leaders of leaders and leaders of leaders all the way up and down the line in our company that have taken what was nothing in 1999 and grown it to the #1 region of any real estate company that is known on the planet. Think about that for a minute. You all collectively, with the people that we got in business with, and Kay and I set our standards early. We were never going with available. We were always going with desirable. And if somebody says the first phone call is not always your best. And we did. There's a lot of franchises we did not award to people who had the money to buy it. And there's some people we had to chase a bit because they were okay where they were and they were satisfied and whatever else. And it took a little bit long, I don't call it sell cycle, but consulting cycle for them to really self-discover that the opportunity we're talking about actually fit them very well. But sometimes the people are too close to themselves to see the opportunity in front of them in a way that's seen from the owner's box or the press box. And so little by little, we became the fastest growing region. We became the most productive region. We may have the market centers that makes the most profit. We have the most profit share. We have the most royalty. We have the top in the last rating that came out. I think it was the first of the year or January. In the top 10, 7 of our offices were in the top 10 across the country, and there are 807 offices in the United States, Canada. How do you think that makes me feel? Somebody the other day wrote me a note because I taught a class, and they said this. He said, Bob, I went to your business class, and for 4 times, first 3 times I didn't listen much, but on the 4th time I actually did what you said. He said, I'm going to tell you, I want to write you this note and tell you that had I not done what you said, I would not have the reserves today to get through what we're going through. And I just want to let you know that. That note, that's bigger than any check I've ever gotten. That's what this is all about. Southeast region, Kay and I, Cheryl, our gratitude, our fortitude, our whatever you want to call it, is because of the lives we know we have changed or made better through the models and systems of this company. And I will always be grateful for that. It's been incredible. Yeah. So, Andy, I've gone long-winded on you, so I'm going to stop. Ask me any question you want. As I dark down a little bit. But if this session is to get to know Bob, I'm trying to get you to get to know Bob.
Oh, you're doing great. And I would expect nothing less from you. And you know, it has changed so many people's lives. I mean, I am a living, breathing example of that myself. And, you know, thank you for taking a chance, really, because, I mean, you had taken chances in the past. It didn't work out, like in a really bad way. And I can only imagine that whenever this opportunity was presented, that you had to be second guessing it based upon your past experiences. It would have been really easy for you to have said no based on your past experiences.
Oh, I said no a couple of times internally, but there was something that came back and negated that no, because the no came out of fear as opposed to out of do something different because you're better at it. It was, what if it doesn't work? If I spend all my money here, then I have nowhere to go. Should I stay in New Orleans and just renovate houses, which I'm good at and have done all that time? Good friend of mine, Linda Nugent Smith, who is my sponsor, has walked me off the ledge at least once, maybe two times of not going forward. I'm thinking, this is not going to work. It's out of town. It's with a strange company. I mean, I don't mind the challenge, but I want the challenge to know it has a good probability of working out. I'm going to lose all my friends because I'm going to be in a foreign country, so to speak. And as she said, Bob, that's why Delta Airlines exists. You can come back anytime you want. You can always say no and sell it to somebody else and come back and do what you do. So why wouldn't you want to give it a shot? Because you know it's something you would really like if it worked. And I will ever be indebted to her for being my backbone when I didn't have one.
Yeah. Did you ever think it would be this big?
No way. I told Kay in our first meeting, I said, if we work really hard, we can put together 1,000 agents. And she went home and told Glenn, this Polish guy from New Orleans is kind of crazy. He's thinking we can build 1,000 agents. No company in Atlanta has ever been as big as some of our smaller offices that we have today.
Yeah.
So, and she came from that world. Here's a small world story. Kay and Glenn are from Louisiana like I am. He sold his company in Lafayette. They moved to New Orleans. She got her license with my company. Kay Evans used to be one of my agents in New Orleans.
Wow.
We didn't find that out until we got here and started talking about Louisiana stories. She said, yeah, I was licensed with Gertrude Gardner, your company. I said, well, I didn't even know you. She says, I didn't even know you either, because I was raising kids and Glenn was working for a new company. And, you know, you can understand how that goes. But we just laughed. We laughed that the paths, how we had crossed a couple times before it was time for us to cross and stay together.
Fate. Yeah.
People come into your lives for reasons and seasons. And Kay Evans, to me, is one of those.
Love that. Well, you told us a great Gary Keller story. And I've asked a lot of our, kind of legends and, again, icons from Keller Williams. What is your favorite Gary Keller story?
Well, the first one, eating bagels with him and just getting to know him. I don't know that you get to know Gary. You get to be in Gary's presence. I'm not so sure Gary lets himself be known. I'm a little way that way sometimes. So I understand that. But I'll tell you one that happened just the other day. He and I are talking about the Indy project, and he noticed the Southeast region was not going full ahead steam. And this is my role at the region. I am the asset protector. I am the engineer on occasion to make sure that when we do something, it's the foundation is going to be solid before we start building walls and roofs. Gary's the other way around. He'll start with a roof and try and find a foundation. You know that, Andy, you and his group. So he and I had, well, let's say a philosophical, logistical difference of opinion. Well, it's tough to do when you're dealing with Gary, because Gary is Gary. But we got on a Zoom call and he says, okay, Bob, I want just point blank, what's your problem with Indy? I said, here's my problem with Indy, Gary. It's a great concept, but the logistics of it are real blurry. I said, and here's my concern. Because you initiated and everybody wants to please you, and it is a possibility for growth, I'm going to have OPs. They're going to run out and get in business with some indies that they shouldn't get in business with. They're going to write contracts they really don't know how to write. There's no guidelines, and it's just a matter of getting numbers. It's another form of John David's growth initiative, but coming from Gary as opposed to from John. John did it with formulas and proof and all this. You're doing it with ideas and vision. I said, great. I said, I want a better MAO contract for my OPs. I want better guidelines for their contract with their Indy. I want a lot of different financial controls to make sure that everything gets paid, including royalty, and that we don't have to go chase something. I don't want cleanup on aisle 4, 7, and 19. That is anti-growth. It's going to take my OPs and their assets and their resources. In some cases, the agents are going to get affected because it's like, well, we have an office over there that does this, but we don't do it here. And that confuses people. It says we have double standards. And I said, that's not how I know us to be. So I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it my way, not going against you, trying to use what you have and then embellishing it. And some history here, but not directly with Gary. The first actual market center application was designed by the Southeast region. There was no application that existed when I opened Metairie. I had to find out from the company attorney what it is that they wanted from me. I said, well, send me an example of somebody else's application. I will just make mine, my data, and have it look like that. So, well, we actually don't have an application. We just ask for this, and then we approve you. I said, really? Okay. It's like going to build an office building without an architectural plan. Well, we'll kind of start in the basement and work our way up. It doesn't work that way. So systems and models. And I told Gary, I said, we don't have the Keller Williams quality of systems and models. We have an idea and we have people who are excited, but they haven't been taught, they haven't been governed, they haven't been assisted. They're just going to do something. And guess who's going to have to clean it up? The region. Because you're not going to do it, Gary. And they're going to look for help. It's going to come my way. So if it's going to come my way and I have the responsibility for it, I want it front-ended the way I would do it, then with the imagination of each OP and all their selections. So he said, okay, I hear you. I said, you hear me? I said, what does hear me mean, Gary? He says, why don't you send me an email list of all your concerns, and I will turn it over to my Indy team, and I will set it up where they listen to your concerns. Because if the Southeast region has a concern, everybody should have a concern. And that was his way of giving us a compliment. I said, okay, I'll buy into that, because we have taken things that have been ideas out of Austin. Can I put it through the purifier, the filter, the meat grinder, the sauteer, and then roll it out? And then when it's rolled out as a compliment to us, other regions take what we develop and roll it out over there. So it's not that we're trying to be the pioneer. I'm just trying to do the one thing. I don't want an asset for an OP and its market center to turn into a liability.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know what Bob's talking about with the Indy model, this is a bit of a new initiative. It's an attempt for us to grow, and like we have mega agent offices now for MREA teams or larger teams. This would be essentially grabbing a smaller brokerage, independent brokerage, and rolling them into the market center, and they resemble in some form or fashion like a mega agent office. Their production would roll through the market center, and yet they would still be independent. They'd have their own errors and omissions. They'd have their own broker. They'd have, they would behave like an independent entity, although they would be attached to a market center.
They can also have their own sign, but it's affiliated with Keller Williams.
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting idea. It certainly is. It sounds like a good way that we could grow fast, but I agree with you, Bob. I think we've had these discussions. I believe that we've got to be very careful with that.
I think it's a balance between vision and implementation. If you don't marry those two, a vision can be cratered by poor implementation, and implementation without a good vision doesn't go far. But I've had a lot of Gary stories along the way, but that's the freshest one because it's about growing our business. It's about dealing in difficult times. It's about moving quickly because the industry is changing rapidly in many ways. And I'm okay with, there are two conflicting sales. If you snooze, you lose, but haste makes waste. Now put those two together and try and come out in the middle.
Yeah. I got an email from Gary a couple of weeks ago, and I was looking for it because I saved it. Oh, here it is. It was entitled "Just Checking In," and he just wanted to see how business was going, how we were doing, and we exchanged a couple emails back and forth. And he closed. He said, "Be safe and strong, be lean and leveraged, be virtual and connected, be creative and competitive.
That's a Gary, no doubt about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for giving of your time and being vulnerable and sharing, so many of your experiences and failures. And thanks for taking a chance on Keller Williams. I think it's working out for you.
It has worked out beautifully. I want to close with this, Andy, if you don't mind.
Please.
I don't want our people to be afraid of burn, learn. I find in all the things I've told you, the best things in my life have happened to me because I was thrown into the worst area of my life. I don't want to be the Phoenix story, but I will tell you that most good things are going to happen to you when you think it's not going to work out well, but you go anyway. You meet somebody or something happens or you learn something. You will not know what that will be until you look back and see how it's part of your life. My daughter, Anna, and we meet twice a year to honor their mother, my first wife. And at those meetings, it's just family, just the four of us. And it's pretty candid. If you know the Kilinski group, it's tough to get entry and stay in there. You got to bring in your double guns, bootstraps, and body armor to go to one of these dinners. And she looked at me, she says, Dad, I was 75. She says, look back 75 years and tell me, if you could, what one or two things would you change in your life? And when I started talking about things I'd like to change, I realized if that changed, so did this, and this. If I change this, all the downstream changed. And when I looked at it after with tears in my eyes, I said, Anna, I wouldn't change a thing, because if I had, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't have the 3 kids I have today. I wouldn't have had the experiences. I wouldn't have had the loves, the lives, the joys. Yeah, there are a lot of tears. There are no hills without valleys. There are no valleys without hills. If there were, it would be a plateau and life would be extremely boring. That life I haven't had, that life I'd never wanted. Andy, thank you for inviting me, but most of all, thank you for what you're doing and leading what I call my center cut 3 market centers out of the Southeast region.
The filet mignon, that's what you call it.
You are the filet mignon, baby, and keep going. Take care.
Well, we appreciate you.
Stay safe.
Thanks, pal. Take care.
Bye.
Y'all be good.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you.
That was fun. Yeah.
That's awesome, Bob. It's Mona. Thanks so much.
All right, girl.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob. Have a great weekend.
On it.
Bye.